All right. Yep. What's going on, Bobby? We're back to back. We just how can you guys miss us if we won't go away, right?
We will
Um,
at one point. It will be like a month, and everyone will be like, "Where are they?"
yeah. What the hell? Garden report, huh? But yeah, there's still, we did the postmortem yesterday, and we'll do a little off-season preview today because you had the brass kind of make the rounds. You have Brad. Did Ime not do an exit presser?
No, they talked on the last game of the finals where they all went, "Oh, this is the worst loss ever," and you got nothing. It
I
was so.
I I
A lot
know.
of teams do that now too. I get it. Like it's just kind of the practice, but like,
I get the players. I understand. Like they want to leave, and like sometimes you're like, I'm just gonna let them go and do their thing and not bring them back to the facility tomorrow.
but
To
what are
do,
you gonna get from a player in
but
5 minutes after the worst loss of their life?
you're not getting anything from them. But I forgot Ime didn't speak. But Brad Stevens spoke to the media this morning. Bobby and I were in on that press conference. So we'll give you some of the highlights from that, some of the things he said. And then Wick Grousbeck went on, sports radio later in the day and kind of, double down on some of the stuff that Brad's saying. And, credit to B Rob Mass Live yesterday. We talked about it, had kind of put out a report, and the first report we'd seen about this, talking about how they've really been given the go ahead to spend. Now, again, I'm a little dubious that this just means, you know, drunken sailor on shore leave. Like, I don't know if it means use all the TPEs, and I don't care how deep we go into the tax. I have to think that everything is within reason and everything is going to be, carefully vetted. But it doesn't sound like the same situation that they had this year, which was you can't go a penny over the tax. It's really important to me. And it was very clear that that was a mandate, and that's what Stevens was operating on. So he was handcuffed during the deadline and throughout the season. Not only handcuffed through what they could do in the deadline, he had to shed payroll to make sure that they didn't hit that tax. So they had to figure out how to do that while improving the team on the fly. It wasn't easy. It's very clear that, they wanted that check from all of the tax teams, and they didn't want to be one. And this year, gloves are kind of off, so off we go. So we're going to talk about that. We'll play some of the sound bites from Brad. We'll talk about Wick. A couple other little developing items I think worth talking about. One involving an old friend, Gordon Hayward. But
Oh, that's something, huh? Oh
we'll
man, this is gonna be a crazy summer.
we'll get into that, and that's what's so fun is the summer. It's so interesting how many different things could theoretically happen this summer because of all of the unrest among so many teams. You already know Kyrie Irving, uh, and his
It's in
situation
flux.
is
Yes.
in flux. The Harden thing, you think he's resigning, it's not really certain. Ben Simmons, is he returning to play basketball? Maybe. Beyond that, you have the Hayward situation here. The Lakers are looking to make big splashes and move on from Westbrook. The Knicks are always looking to do something really stupid with their money. But there's a lot of players out there. And plus, also next year, really interesting year because you have so many players returning. So many teams are going to look so different than they looked this year. Teams are going to be better. Teams are going to be healthier. There's so many star players that just missed action. So the entire landscape of the league as we knew it this year is going to change dramatically heading into next year. So we really are just starting here, but just dealing with the Celtics. I think the Celtics are going to have one of the more boring off seasons, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And we talked about it on the show yesterday, Bobby, that probably the best thing that they can do is, maintain their core, not try to do anything splashy, not try to overreact to a loss, and, just try to build. But in order to do that, they need the dollars, because really all they have is the use of a mid-level exception, a taxpayer mid-level, and these TPEs that they have here, three of them, one of which expires in a month, and then two other smaller ones that they can use into the year, that they have a little bit of time to, a 6.9 and a 5.8. I think it's 5.9 actually, but regardless, that's about right. So the 17.1, that one's coming up in less than a month. That's the one they want to use. Do you think that's sincere? that they're gonna use him here based on what we were hearing?
I looked into the history today of their
Because it's
tax
not
payments in the
good.
past.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not high, and I know it was 10 years ago when you were a taxpayer, and it's a different time. I don't think there were any teams paying $100 million in tax back then. But now you do have these mega power teams like Golden State, $170 million in tax last year. Brooklyn, I believe, was even more than that. And your high point on this ownership group, I think, was what, 15, 17 million-ish in there somewhere, in the mid-teens somewhere. So they've never gone uh, much beyond where they're already at right now, which is about 12 million tax payment, 8 million over the line. And if you use that full 17 million TPE, that's a $90 million tax hit if you're not sending anything else out. So that Duncan Robinson thing we kicked around yesterday is effectively a $50 million commitment for 1 year. 1 year effectively for Duncan Robinson would be a $50 million real money payment, which is heavy. And I know we both snub our nose at the tax, John, and rightfully so. But I also understand if you look at Duncan Robinson, if you're them, and say 50 million for this guy, I don't know. Especially because it's not about the money you spend, it's about what it prevents you from doing otherwise. So I still think there's a case for it, but you start to look at what the actual cost is of some of these moves, and you
It's
definitely do the
huge.
mid-level, but it's huge, yeah.
But that's the thing is there's no fan out there that gives a crap how much money Wick spends. And again, it's always been my contention. If you're a sports owner and you're looking at your bottom line, you're doing it wrong.
Mhm.
You're not, you need to spend within whatever rules are allowed because that's the point of it. You're here to serve the fans and the fan base. You're not here to nickel and dime your way to profits. And I know some people do that, but ultimately, that's just not what sports ownership is about. This is a vanity. This is a fun thing that billionaires do to just say that they do it. And honestly, that's really all you need. The owner is supposed to do nothing but say, here's a blank checkbook and let me get out of the way. I may jump in and say, there's certain things that I don't think represent our brand that I don't want you associated with. So an owner could veto a particular move if he didn't really want a type of person to come in here. But beyond that, they should never have the opportunity to say, yes, I will spend that much money, or no, I won't. If it's within the rules and the person you hired to run your team thinks it makes you better, then that's what you're supposed to do. So I have no sympathy for Wick's wallet, and I don't particularly care there, and neither should any fan. We don't get into this. We don't start watching sports to see if you can stay under the tax threshold. That's not really
But
what it's
the
about.
question we have that's worthwhile is whether they're going to do it. And the questions asked today almost weren't relevant. Are you going to pay the tax? They're already in the tax. They're going to pay the tax no matter what. The level of tax they're going to spend is significant here. It's already at that 8 million mark over the line, and what you basically have in the NBA is a tiered system where if you go, let's say, like 5 million over, it's this amount per dollar. If you go to 8 million, that's another bump, say like 175 per dollar. And then there's another tier you move into based off like each $5 million you spend over the line. So they're right at that line of the next tier. And all of a sudden, I'm just looking now. Right now, your tax bill is 12 million. If you just use the mid-level, the 6 million mid-level, that's 26 million in tax for this team, which again is 11 million more than they've ever spent
No
in
one
tax
cares.
ever.
Pay the tax. It's not real money. Just pay it,
I'm
pay
not
it,
I'm
pay it,
not
pay it.
defending Wick. I'm just saying, is he going to do it? No one really asked it
And
today, and he
so,
didn't really answer.
and that's it. You're right. He was not asked that, which is, are you willing to spend $90 million in tax to add two players this year that might have marginal impact? Because that's the question, and that's what it comes down to. Is it's a lot of money, and I'm dubious that they're actually going to do it. I believe the company line is, yeah, sure, for the right guy, but who is the right guy, and what is that?
And that's what we've asked all day. Yeah.
And
Who
what
is
does
it?
that what does that mean? So here's a little bit of Brad today talking about kind of the TP, being asked specifically about the TPE and kind of what he's been told with management and just how the team plans to go about it.
How much do you expect them to be willing to spend this summer to help the team?
Yeah, we've got the okay to do whatever we need to do. Well, I think the trade exception, there's a reason why a lot of the trade exceptions go unused, right? We have a bunch of them right now. We have one that expires, obviously the big one expires in July. We've got a couple of others that expire later. They're all reasonable amounts that you can take good players in with. And so you balance that on, okay, what's the cost that you're going to have to pay? Who's going to, again, are you going to bring somebody in that's going to add to, not necessarily take away, which, you obviously don't want to do. So it's still about being prudent on and thoughtful about what the deal is. But we're going through the whole list, and we're trying to find guys that fit what we need and will fit in to how we want to play and how Ime wants to coach, and and makes it so that this train can take off from the get-go next year. I thought one of the things that caught up with us was that we started so poorly last year.
That was a pretty good point at the end there.
Yeah,
there you are.
I'm gonna cut him off a little bit, but I understand. They started off and then they got burnt out. They didn't have the depth. They played too many minutes. They were playing from behind. That's what Brad was going to say to close it. I wanted to get to the point of the bite where he said we're going to bring somebody in here that's going to play within the style that they play. That's something
you hit this pretty good yesterday, and that was basically the theme of the presser today.
Yeah, and so that's what I'm interested in, and that's what's I'm not sure I'm for it entirely. Like in theory, I do. And again, just to kind of, for people who missed what we were talking about the other day, what we had discussed then, Bobby and I, was, they're all in on defense, but they're short, obviously they're shorting themselves a little bit on offense. So there's this vibe with the team and just the way that it's coached and the way Brad likes it, or the way Ime wants it, that everybody's got to be able to defend their position and they got to be switchable. And that's the brand that they want to play. But, and so they won't bring in guys who are offensive players only, because they'll be defensive liabilities. In order to see the court on this team, you have to be able to defend in this scheme and in this system, because that's how they're going to play. But what you're missing there is that you have players on your team that might be offensive liabilities, and they're hurting you in other ways. So why is it okay to be really good at one thing but not the other? And is it always going to be defense centric? In a perfect world, everybody would be a great two-way player, and that's fine
to acquire.
But they're tough to acquire. You want a 3-and-D guy. Realistically, you're going to get a 3 or D guy. I don't know that you're going to find these guys, because everybody wants to fill their bench or their lineup with 3-and-D guys. We always talk about a Jay Crowder type. Like, he was probably undervalued when he was here in Boston, just to consider.
Oh, definitely. I loved him.
But I'm saying undervalued in the sense of, like, he was never going to be a star, but the value of that player in that position is that he's starting on one of the best teams in basketball for the last 2 years, but he's an ideal, wing depth sort of player that you just plug and play and you just feel confident having them out there. Of course you want those guys. They're hard to find. So instead you kind of have D and a little bit of O, sort of guys. So yeah, they did talk about that today, that they want guys to play within their style. And that worries me a tad, because personally, I'd like to see them look for offense only. And then every once in a while, just play lineups where you have to hide a defender, hide a guy or two, because that's just what you need. And we saw Golden State have those types of lineups and the ability to hide them and still have a championship caliber defense. That was the reason that they won the title, not their offense, their defense. So why can't the Celtics do that? I don't get it.
Because the guy they bring in at that spot may not play, and that brings us back to the Robinson dilemma. Do you pay that much for a guy who might not even be part of the rotation here? I think they would take a flyer on a guy in that role who is low cost. Certainly their internal options, which we'll get to as well. A little bit of optimism, I think, about some of the younger guys on the roster here, which I think is kind of Brad's pitch rather than Ime's, because Ime didn't play a lot of those guys. So that just sort of shows, I think, something that Brad has to assimilate to here is Ime's coaching style. Like, he could potentially give him players that don't mesh with his style, but it might not be conducive to actually getting anything out of that acquisition if they're not going to be utilized to the fullest. I mean, we go through this with Schroeder, and I guess Richardson's not as good of an example because he was a pretty good two-way player. But, I mean, Schroeder felt like that was kind of Brad's deal value pickup, and a guy who had a little bit of an agreement for a role on this team that put Ime in a tough spot, and
It wasn't
eventually
Schroeder's
they had to fix
defense.
that.
It wasn't Schroeder's defense that killed them. It was his offense. The thing he was brought in here to do was a style
I'm just
that
talking, yeah, more like stylistic
he
fit on
was
the
not
team in terms of what
he
they want
was
to do.
not an elite defender, but he wasn't somebody, and he's a bit of a pick magnet. But he wasn't a guy that was hunted, per
No,
se. Right. He
he had
has
his good
some skill.
stretches.
He had some stretches too, and he's a pesky guy, and he can come up with steals. He has good hands. He's not,
He's available. Want to bring him back? I don't know where he's gonna end up, but anyway, it does narrow you in a class that's already pretty narrow given your resources and given what's available out there. I mean, if you're not giving up dozens and dozens of million in tax, that cuts off the level of a guy that you can get here. And again, we talked about this being an expiring asset. If you don't use the 17 million here, whatever you don't use of it is just going to disappear. So you almost have to eat that tax just to have the asset available to you in the future here. And that's why I like the Robinson thing, even if he's not an ideal fit for the system, even if he's not a guy who's necessarily going to be a major cog in your rotation. Sometimes you overpay. I mean, do you think any Warriors fan was thrilled about Andrew Wiggins at 30 million? This is the perfect comparison. You don't love that contract. You don't love the tax you're paying on it. I mean, a better example is Kelly Oubre last year with the Warriors, who I think cost like upwards of 50 million in tax, or maybe more for the Warriors. Actually, I believe. I think he was pushing 100 million in tax. Kelly Oubre alone, but it was a placeholder contract. It was a guy that could fill that gap for a year, and then you figure out what you're doing from there. As much as you'll want to learn from what the Warriors did on the court this year, you want to learn from what the Warriors are doing on the books and in the GM office and everything they did to put that roster together. Wick got asked on the radio today, "Oh, what can you kind of pull from the Warriors' finances here? Like, do you have to spend to that level?" And he just kind of blew out the Warriors' example because they're spending hundreds of millions on their team in tax alone. So 500 million collectively on that team almost. So you're in a different universe right now, and it is really tricky if you're not going to embrace the tax fully to compete with. I don't know if you want to still use Brooklyn as an example, but they're a team that's willing to spend to that level. Your Lakers, your Knicks potentially down the line, and some of these franchises that just have this massive, massive money advantage on you. Golden State, the latest example here.
Yeah. It is what it is. I mean, the Nets are there. They can spend whatever they want. They're not really worried about money. You do have
I
some
mean,
real.
let's get an idea of what the bill is going to look like this year for a couple of teams at the top here. You got the Clippers at 56 million in tax. You got the Warriors at 74 million. You have the Bucks at 14, and then you're kind of in that class there at around like 12 with the Nets and Jazz. And I don't think this includes the repeater penalties on top of that.
Right.
But you're a rung below, I'd say, the Clippers, Warriors, and Nets in terms of those elite playmakers. I guess everybody is, but still, if you want to compete at that level and those your competition teams potentially next year, you got to at least bridge that gap a little bit. Like, you're never going to be the Warriors. You don't have that stadium. You don't have that payroll. Even some of just the way things shook out with Durant there allowed them to bring in more money than the Celtics realistically can right now.
This is what's frustrating is like, this is great if you do it. And if there are teams that want to just shed salary, you got to be there. I mean, look at how many teams this year were desperate to get under the tax that were giving guys away. Norman Powell being one of those, and that was a guy who I actually liked. And I thought, there were a lot of teams who were just, I got to get under this threshold. I think last year at this deadline
you missed opportunities.
Was a real good opportunity to buy, but they were so hell bent on staying below the tax, and now they're okay to spend it because they wanted that windfall to come back to them. Well, again, hindsight and all that, but I mean, we were saying it at the time, that was a mistake, and at the end of the day, it might have cost you a championship. If you weren't so worried about it last year, you might have been able to pick up better assets. Sure, you would have had to pay for it, and you wouldn't have gotten that refund check. But then you wouldn't have to worry about going and overpaying and spending $90 million potentially on a Duncan Robinson type figure, because now you've been given the clearance to. So I don't really understand the thinking behind that to me, you should always just be looking at if the poorer teams, the non-contending teams, the teams that their number one goal is to not pay tax, want to give good players away, you have to be there and scoop them up. And I felt like that was an opportunity last year, and they kind of mucked it. So the end of the year and the new year is a reset. People are willing to, throw some money around and spend some resources in order to try and improve themselves. It's an open marketplace and everybody's a buyer. At the deadline, very few teams were. Very, very, very few. So now you've got a lot of competition. It's a strange strategy just to save a buck. And which is why I say, like, an owner should never, ever, 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 ever think with their wallet at all. It's just, if that's your game, sell the team, to someone who's not going to do that, because
plus
they're opening the door for people to buy. The teams that are willing to spend are going to have a huge competitive advantage.
This is why I always hated it. Remember Danny used to say, "Oh, the off season, it's much easier to do a deal in the off season," but when they'd kick the can
totally
down from the
disagree.
deadline. Yeah,
I mean, yes and
you have
no.
You have this
Yes
hard
and no.
cap restriction now, so you can't, guys that were under contract at the deadline who are free agents now, you don't have access to, like Jalen Brunson, Beal potentially too. There's different names that you could have maybe gotten in on that part of the season who just you can't contractually get in on now. And like you just mentioned, the competition is much higher.
Yes and no. Everybody's involved now, and you're right. There's more. You're sometimes paying a greater. What their point is, you're paying a greater premium at the deadline because you've got 2, 3, 4 guys available and 8 teams who are willing to overpay because they're knocking on the door and they think they're one player away. So I mean, sometimes it is. This just was one of those years where it wasn't, and you have to capitalize on that. You have to recognize the opportunity, and they didn't recognize it. So
Who
that's
went?
what happened.
Powell, Covington.
Yeah, there was
a number of different guys we like.
There are a bunch of guys that you'd be thrilled if you were able to get now with TPEs and whatever. That not. But anyway, neither here nor there. If they really do have the opportunity to spend, that's fine. Then we're talking about what the style is going to be. Now, this is what's interesting. We played that last Steven soundbite that said that they want to have something that fits their system, which would lead you to believe it's going to be the type of player that can play the type of defense that's the team's hallmark. But then he also did concede that there's some offensive shortcomings on this team. And here's a bite he was talking about here regarding the team's lack of playmaking.
Those issues are only going to be resolved by the players, your main players, continuing to develop, or do you feel like adding more playmaking off the bench and making other tweaks is what you need to augment?
What was the word you used?
I can't even remember at this point, honestly.
It was I didn't know what it meant. So I was trying to figure out what you were asking as you were going through it. Jared, I think we need a little bit more playmaking. Yeah, I think that's real. I think we need more playmaking, but I don't think we can expect to be stagnant, right? So we have to make sure that we continue to play with pace. When we're at our best, we play with pace, and when we create one advantage, the ball whips around the court. And I just thought that we played pretty slow in that last series, and again, credit them, they impacted us for sure. But and all that said, we had a chance to go up 3-1 in game 4 with about 5 minutes to go, and maybe we feel a little bit different. But there's no question that in this league, the more guys that can make a play offensively, the better. And I think that the challenge again is making sure that whatever you do around the margins of our roster, we have a unique identity, and we have uniqueness in our size and our ability to be versatile, all across the board. And so we have to take all of that into account when we're adding to our team. But
there it kind of is again. We need more playmaking, but at the same time, we've got to still be big and be able to play the type of defense we want to play. So
yeah,
again,
he said it about 4 times.
And then again, so once again, you're ruling out like just like little motor scooter type of go just all offense point guards who are going to be undersized and not able to defend, guys who are nothing but space floor spacers and shooters, but who aren't able to defend their position. Like, there's no role for you on this team if you can't do that other stuff, and it's almost like it feels like any player they would bring in is almost like NS Cantor, on this team. Like, I might be able to sneak him. I might be able to sneak 5 minutes of Cantor in, and reap some of the benefits of his offensive rebounding and post presence. But that's it, because he can't play defense well enough to hang. And I'm just too worried about that all the time. So again, we're back to, yeah, we need more playmaking, but they've also got to be a dynamic defender and big and switchable. Where are you finding these people? Like, you have a lot of people out there right now saying we need an upgraded point guard, and rightfully so. People are like, who is that guy? Well, now who is that guy who's the upgraded point guard who's also an exceptional defender and has size? Like, where are you? You're just adding more layers to the impossibility of this find. And how are you acquiring them? With a TPE or a mid-level exception? How in the world are you finding a player like this who can provide all of these things?
I mean, we've certainly looked at every name that's available under those constraints there, and it's not like even Tyus Jones, who I think you'd be thrilled if you got Tyus Jones. He's a 6-foot point guard who's probably going to have some issues you talk about there. So you're definitely restricting yourself immensely here. But I also get the thinking. I think what one part I think you left out of it, John, is he also mentioned you're not going to take away something that's helping you right now and hope that something you're replacing that with is better. I think it goes back to Smart and a conversation we had about him yesterday and just how available he is. I think he's one of your main value chips if you were going to really go out there and get aggressive and pursue one of these higher value guys, whoever that would be. And I think Brad and even Ime has learned that what you got value-wise collectively out of Smart by replacing the poor defense you had at that position last year with elite defense and one that really motors and anchors the system there is overall better value than maybe a little bit better offensive point guard play.
There's
at
no
that
question.
spot.
You're looking basically at Kemba versus Smart.
Yeah.
Which team, under which player did the team function better? It's Smart.
And I keep saying Brogdon, like you'd rather have Smart than Brogdon. That's like a great example, right? Like Brogdon's a solid defender, he's fine.
He's not a good shooter.
Much better offensive player than Smart scoring wise. But is the passing that much better? Does he solve all the issues you have there? And then you're much worse defensively, I think. Not to mention the durability concerns with Brogdon.
Yeah.
In which I think you got to look into.
I mean, and I take it back. But he had a bad shooting year. But yes, Brogdon coming off of he can't play a full season ever. And he's coming off a year he shot 31% from three. Obviously, he's a better shooter than that.
He was derailed,
overall.
yeah.
So, but he had a rough year. So yes, he's a scorer. Is he a facilitator? No, it's not. That's not that guy. He's not that guy. He's a guy who can score.
So does today take Robinson off the table, you think, just based on the comments we heard?
I mean, yes, in the sense of like, and again, Robinson was just a name we threw out there because you need shooting and he fits in the TPE. I don't think there's necessarily what they're looking for. I think it's more likely than not, you're not going to trade for a player that fits into the full TPE. Most likely you're going to do 13, a 12 million, an 11, a 13. Yeah, you can split it. I highly doubt you're going and getting a single guy who's at that number. Robinson was thrown out just because he's right under that number and he fills a need. I never really thought he was a realistic guy, but it's a fun debate to have, which is to say, would you bring in somebody with an elite skill set and one that you desperately need who doesn't at all fit your profile?
Well, it was fun, yeah, also because he was probably free. So now if we're looking at some of these other names, like I think there are some appealing ones that are much less costly tax-wise and salary-wise than Robinson. The three that really stick out to me probably are the guy Malik Beasley, who they've had a lot of interest in recent years. My other one would have been the Who's the forward who used to play with LeBron there? Contavious Caldwell Pope.
Contavious Pope.
who's an
Yeah, if you say
expiring deal.
Satoransky, we're logging off.
No,
okay?
no, I saw the headline the chat
I
was
know,
talking about. He's off to
I know.
Spain. What a shame. That means he was available. Yeah, so Pope, who was the one I just mentioned, Pope, any wing there that brings shooting and a little bit more defense. I know people like Herter. Beasley was the one I mentioned, and then
Like a Richardson type.
that's the killer, right? And we're gonna keep asking that question forever. Could you have just kept them? It's a much lower salary too. It's unreal what they cost themselves last year by like backflipping over the tax. And again, all these cap people are saying, oh, they avoided the cap like it was some big accomplishment, or the tax rather. You cost yourself a lot by avoiding the tax. And what do you gain? Instead of paying the repeater tax in 25, you're paying in 26. What's the value on that? I mean, that's beyond Tatum's contract even. I mean, there was no need to avoid the tax last year. So again, I don't know. Did the Spurs want Richardson? Maybe they did. Maybe they said, we want him because we can flip him into another first this offseason. But if you could have kept Richardson and the Spurs didn't even want him and you just want to dump him because it matched salary and you keep this TP here, what was the point? Because now you're looking for Richardson. Oh, it's so ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. Like if you were able to acquire Richardson with the TPE for nothing, wouldn't you be like, that's a pretty good find? If for a portion of the TPE, you'd be like, yeah, that's a great.
They did the same thing with Fournier. They added Fournier. They split the TP in half for no reason, flipping out Tice because they needed to offset the cost and avoid the tax. And then they brought back Tice at an even bigger number later.
They bring back Tice for a bigger number. Yeah.
You look at all the moves they've made over the years to avoid the tax and cut salary, and everyone has killed them.
Shipping Cantor out along with Desmond Bane to avoid the tax, and then bringing Cantor back.
I know, and that was, even if bringing Cantor back was a good move, it just looks so ridiculous, and it wasn't a good move in the end. It's crazy. It just goes back to just pay some tax. It's not killing you. What did they gain? They've been out of the tax since 2019. And what did they gain? They were contending in some of those years. They were certainly contending this year. Oh, it's so ridiculous. And now they're in a worse spot trying to get back into the tax.
So that's
they
what
can't
I mean.
add anything easily.
So again, I hate this whole like, we are willing to do whatever it takes. You kind of missed an opportunity to have done what it would have taken, perhaps to have won a banner last year, and to have
you could even go back to Hayward
and to have set yourself up for success moving forward in a better way. So now you're okay with it. Well, you should have been okay with it all along, because you've handcuffed your team in so many times over the last 3-4 years with this just slavish insistence on staying below the tax that you've thrown draft picks away for nothing, just to stay under. Nothing, just tossed them away. And it's insane to me to be selling off first-round draft picks to be able to get under the the tax threshold.
Yeah, I mean, do you really think the Spurs wanted Richardson? I mean, come on.
I don't think it mattered.
Didn't.
They wanted the picks.
Yes. I mean, they took Langford, and they're probably going to move on to Richardson now.
So if they are willing to do it now, then I'll say, why did you wait till this long? I don't get it. I don't get it.
Yeah, I'll give some credit to the Richardson people. I didn't think it was that important to keep him around. He certainly would have helped, and long term, the salary.
He maintained that shooting throughout the year. He finished the league, I think, top 10 in 3-point shooting percentage. Again, not some of the volume of some of the top guys in the league for sure, but he kept that going all season long. He was a valuable guy, and a team desperate for that. I mean, desperate for a shooter and somebody to spell the Jays a little bit. And again, if you could have found a way to keep both, you might be having different conversations. We might be having totally different conversations right now. And they friggin' loved him, and Tatum loved him. Like he was a good.
This
teammate.
is a great point here too, of like the fallout effect of all this. And I know B-Rob wrote about this a year ago or so. That whole Fournier misuse of the TP too screwed up your whole Beal pursuit, if that's what you want to do. Because you could have kept kicking it to the future with those trades to the point where you would have had a Beal-sized TP. So you would have basically
and
been
gotten him
absorbing.
with nothing but draft picks, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man, they've screwed this up. And again, in the end, you're in the finals, so you kind of walk backwards in the success here just because of how great
Yeah.
those draft picks were from Tatum, Brown, Robin, Smart.
What
But
somebody on
around the
Twitter,
edges, you're screwed because of it.
one of my a follower on Twitter said wanted me to mention Victor Oladipo as a guy. Is that somebody
You've
you
been
would
talking
consider?
about him for years.
Well,
Did you see him in the East Finals?
I have, but now you're talking about you want the 50% of him that still exists now as a bench guy, not as a starter or a star.
I think you're in a good spot for guys like that on minimums if they really want to come and join the finals team. That would be awesome.
But I don't think that's what he wants.
Maybe not, but yeah, I'm more willing to listen on Tucker than ever before if the price is right, and that's the kind of guy that's available to you for $6 million. Even if you have to do 2 years there, that's tricky. But he's effectively a backup center, right, in certain kind of lineups. So he'd be useful and versatile at that spot. Again, I don't love Oladipo as a player, so I'm probably out on him just because it looks like he has nothing left at all.
I thought he played pretty good defense, and I think he can provide
He
some.
did.
I thought he can provide some offense off the bench. This is the guy. I mean, I know he's suffered a serious injury. He was an all defensive player, a few years back. That's something that's in his DNA. He's not. It's not a fluke that he reinvented himself to play some defense because his offensive game is suffering now. He was a very good defensive player in his prime, which was only a few years ago.
That's a fair point, and he looked good. He looked good on that end in these finals.
So I think again, that's and again, I'm just someone had brought it up here, on Twitter, Dalton. So I wanted to mention that here just as a name. So we're talking about this stuff and whether they will spend and what they will do. And again, there's no reason to talk about the past, but I do think the past is prologue in a lot of different ways. And if they haven't spent before, are you confident they will now, or is this a lot of lip service?
2010. That's like a 2010 Celtics move, by the way, right? Oh, we're bringing in Victor Oladipo. Here's Rasheed Wallace.
Yeah. I like the name. Somebody had mentioned it in the chat in the last show we did too, and I didn't bring it up. So I'm glad this.
How about Carmelo? Interest in him?
Another one somebody threw out there was Mook.
I don't love that one because again, we're going to get to the Hayward news of the day. You know how much I love him, but I just don't think you circle back to the stuff that didn't work before, especially with this core, right? I guess there's a scenario I don't think there is a scenario with Hayward. Maybe Morris if there's absolutely nothing else. But again, he has knee problems that have gone back to his last stint here. So I don't think you want to mess with guys who have availability issues right now.
Yeah.
You want
all right. Well, let's get to the other news then. We the latest news, and we'll wrap a little bit after this, but we do want to get to that. I also do want to tell people just a couple of notes. If you want to, you don't have to, wait for us. You can join. Oh, I wanted to tell you about Discord. Our Discord server, clnsmedia.com/Discord. The chat is always going there. Well over 1,000 people in there, actively, hundreds in there at a time, chatting up Celtics all day and night. Go in there, check it out. It's a really good community. And I know a lot of you people have already joined, but if you're just looking for a place to go hang with some people, chat Celtics, start your own chat rooms, talk with one another. Great opportunity to do so. Bobby and I jump in there from time to time, along with Sherrod, Jimmy, Josue. Gelso is in there as well. So that's always good. But again, also want to tell you a little bit about our sponsor. That is Calm, #1 sleep and meditation app. We know for some people trying something new can be a little bit weird, but I'm telling you, this is well worth it. Everyone's really worried about their morning rituals and starting their day off right, but ending it the right way is just as important, if not more so. So we're talking about different steps you can take here by using Calm, guided meditation, sleep stories, curated music tracks, stories that are both for kids and adults. Obviously sound effects, forest sounds, whatever it is, just really soothing stuff that'll really help you kind of unwind, get your mind right, get the sleep that you need, get yourself mentally in the right place, which will also help you get your body right as well. So we strongly advise checking it out. It's a tremendous deal. If you do go to calm.com/garden, you can get 40% off a premium subscription. So it's worth checking out. I'd say go for it.
They're saying you don't meditate in the chat, or they don't believe you do.
Me?
Yeah.
I have 2 speeds, guys. Two speeds. It's on and off. Okay.
Yeah, right. How do they know? You can tune it down right after the show.
I
That's
can just
the app.
I have 2. It's start and stop. Those are my 2 speeds. Trust me. So when I'm on, I'm on, and when it's off, it's off. So absolutely. And plus, you've got to be able to. I got to bring this down somehow, you know. So definitely check it out. I really do think it's worthwhile. And again, support our sponsors. It helps us, obviously, and it helps us bring you more content for free, as we like to do so, as much as possible. And again, we're still doing shows after the finals. We got another one coming up on Thursday. So we need our calm, but we need your support as well. So again, if you are interested in checking it out and you're even slightly curious, at least just go check out the website, calm.com/garden, receive 40% off a premium subscription. We want to wrap the show with this latest news on the Hornets looking to trade. Basically, they're looking to offload Gordon Hayward by attaching a first-round pick to a deal. So that's it. 2 years left on Gordon on his 4-year, $120 million deal that they signed when they swooped in and took him away from the Celtics. And what do you know? They want out. And again, it's understandable because they have young stars here that they want to pay. Rozier's obviously worked out really well for them, and you've got Bridges and you've got LaMelo, and Bridges wants a max deal, and they want to be able to do that. So they want to get out for Gordon, and this sounds to me like they are giving Gordon Hayward away. Who wants him? Do you want him, Bobby?
It's not going to work. I do. Part of me wants him because I thought he was such a perfect fit next to the Brown and Tatum tandem. Of course, his playmaking has been dearly missed ever since. The biggest reason last year was a disaster is because they didn't replace him. So I think people saw his value that they lost there. But the money doesn't work. There's no real way to match it. What are you going to send? Tice, White, and
Al. It's Al.
Al?
It's
Yeah,
Al.
like you're not doing that. And plus the reliability questions that a lot of people in our chat had and a lot of fans had in general really came to fruition there. He's gotten hurt every single year in Charlotte. So you don't go back to that. I think there was certainly some friction on the team over his role and the coach and everything like that came out, and you just don't want to circle back to that era. I mean, how awful was that era looking back on it? Just all the disdain, all the injuries, all the dysfunction.
The disdain, I don't know if it was personally directed at Hayward. It was directed at Stevens' blind faith in Hayward over the guys who were there. And so I don't know that Hayward did anything to, bring that on himself. I think he was Brad's boy. Brad gave him the benefit of the doubt, and you had 2 guys in Tatum and Brown who were like, I'm better than this friggin' dude right now. Why is he playing? And not Tatum as much as Brown. Why is he playing over me? And again, you're also talking about hungry mouths like Terry Rozier and Marcus Morris on that team. And everybody's like, I'm pretty friggin' good too. So you had about 4 guys on that team who had a beef.
I will say, though, this looked like a potential budding contender in the East here, and it's going in the wrong direction, certainly now. They lose their coach that they signed or agreed to have head coach them, and now they're looking for a coach again. Kenny Atkinson backing out of that, and now they're talking about bringing Russ in, and this is a report we've heard several times, the possibility that you could be flipping Hayward for Russ, which Lakers fans should be very excited about. I mean, think of Hayward and Russ.
Massive upgrade.
Even with the health concern. And now you're trying to fit in Russ next to Melo and Bridges and all these guys down in Charlotte. And is this just Jordan saying, I've got this Jordan athlete here I can bring in and sell and have under my wing? It doesn't make any sense. I think this just brings Jordan's ownership here further in the question. It hasn't been a great ownership tenure down there. And it's probably a team that's not going to reach its peak and compete with the Celtics at the highest level here. I mean, they're still looking to make the playoffs for the first time with this core. And they've been at their best with Hayward, right? Every time he's gotten hurt, they've been in a good spot and they've fallen apart after that. So this isn't good news by any down there in Charlotte.
I remember, Bobby, we were talking about this during the year. The on-off numbers with Hayward in terms of the impact that he had on that team and
Just the
winning,
record alone. Yeah.
was significant. So they really do suffer when he's not out there. And again, in the right role, he's still a really good player because he just does everything. He's smart. He's unselfish. He moves the basketball. He can handle it. He's a facilitator. Honestly,
And what's the
funny
cost? Tax.
is
It's the same combo we just had.
Gordon Hayward's mentality about basketball is what you actually want to inject into Tatum and Brown's veins to get them to be more complete players and recognize.
I loved his game. I don't think
and-
anyone ever appreciated it enough.
and
he didn't get the full
recognize-
version, but
recognize you have the requisite skills to go off when needed or when the opportunity is there. But sometimes what the game needs is something else. So just do that and don't worry so much about scoring all the time. He's just very good at that. And he's good at looking for a shot, and he's good at, I mean, how many shots do you feel he forced ever? Like everything, he makes the right read. You talk about how many times the Celtics ran into issues with players having the ball and not making the right read. Gordon Hayward always makes the right read. He really does. He's that kind of player. So you would like a piece of that, but again, it doesn't work here because now you're talking 3 wings where you've already got 2. The only way you bring in a guy like Hayward is if in a separate deal you were going to move one of your other wings for some other big blockbustery, landmark, position altering trade. It's just not going to happen. So the Hayward fit here doesn't work. But yes, my God, if you didn't care about money and you didn't care about what it took to get him and it was easy and you could just take Gordon Hayward's skill set and plant him on the Celtics, hell yeah, you would do that. There's really not a way to make it happen.
There's ways to make it happen. I'm just not willing to do it if he's this injury prone. And I think we've learned that he is. It hasn't been a season he's gotten through, and his reliability and his ability to come back have been put into question here.
I know, but the Wellesley police and the cheese shop would be so happy, right?
Yeah. Again, if he's healthy and you feel good about him and he's not even available, the fact that they're trying to get rid of him here just shows it's a damaged asset, and you're not going to give up Horford for that. You're not going to give up Smart for that. If this was Hayward and you were really sure you were getting Hayward, I think you do look at those 2 things. But right now, I think you're out of this. They're going to do the Russ thing probably, and my head's going to spin.
Yeah. It's a bad offseason, and it might have worked out for you anyway.
I guess you still look back on the management of that cap space and think.
And again, somebody here saying, like, we said they needed another wing. What are you saying? No, I mean, you need a wing who's willing to come in and accept playing 18, 19 minutes a game, who can spell Tatum and Brown, who's going to cost you 12, 13, 14 million dollars, not a $30 million luxury piece to stick in your bench. Like, that's bad business, you would think. Like I said, if you weren't thinking about money, yes, you would take a Gordon Hayward on your team. He's a good basketball player and he makes you better. But it's just, I don't know how. You'd have to move a lot of things to make this work.
It'd have to be Horford probably, right?
Horford for sure.
Yeah. So there's a world in which Hayward's right that I would think about doing that, but where he's not, no way.
Well, let's put it this way. Would you do Horford for Hayward for 30? For 2 more years, if you got a pick out of the deal to give Horford away for 26 and live without Horford here?
You're asking the wrong guy that question.
That's the only deal. That's the way the deal works. But then they would have to take on Hayward. They would have to take on Horford.
No, you just saw what Horford did last year. I think that's super valuable going forward, and there's the potential that he could be a minimum guy for years to come after this season, which I think is valuable as well. I think the underrated part of this Hayward thing, and the reason that
there will be, if you got rid of Horford this year, there would be a Horford round 3. He would come back. You'd get him.
So?
He'd return in another year.
Yeah, maybe it's a wink, and it's just salary relief for the Hornets. And he gets right in Charlotte this time. He had his Oklahoma hiatus, and now he has a Charlotte hiatus for a year.
Imagine a Celtics team that's a 1 seed heading into the final 2 weeks of the season, and then Rob and Hayward both go down.
Yeah, there's a buyout of Horford at the March deadline. I don't think that's how it works, but This isn't happening. It's fun to kick around and it's good memories. I mean, this was our first rendition of the show, the Hayward Celtics. So I really loved that year. And they were rolling when he was looking good in the bubble. Remember, that team was probably better than the team we just watched. But
The funny thing is like, everybody thinks we have our roles on the Garden Report, and Jimmy and I are the cynics. But like Jimmy and I were like, this team's the best team in basketball, and they're winning the title, and nobody's getting in their way. I mean, we were so bullish on that team because I really did think that they had something going until Hayward got hurt there, and that really derailed everything. But I thought they were a wagon going and headed to the finals. I don't know if they would have been able to beat the Lakers that year, but they were
I
the
think
most
healthy they would have. But
they were the
it would
best.
have been
They
tough.
were the best bubble team. I mean, them in Phoenix, but they were the best
Yeah.
bubble team. They were so good.
Yeah, that's a good conversation. Which team was better, them at their peak or the Celtics this year? It's probably pretty close, but
Yeah.
He gets hurt and everything changes.
The
And Kemba
bigs-
too. I think
the
he's
bigs-
probably the swing.
The bigs that year, and then Kemba was tough. Yeah. Anyway, so that's all we've got for tonight. But we did want to kind of just hang with you guys a little bit and talk some of this Brad Stevens stuff. Any other picking up the pieces here before we wrap? I know Wick talked as well. Your general read on his situation there.
Not too much revelatory. He certainly said they'll do whatever it takes, which is pretty vague. Other than that, just a lot of talk about the year that was, and
we did it,
and all those things. Yeah,
I love that. Dead silent all year until
I was super surprised to hear from him. It had been a while.
Victory lap.
But was there anything else on there? Oh yeah, no one's interviewed Brad Stevens. That's good news. Sounds like he's in it for the long haul. But he also talked about the continuity as well. I think the big takeaway of the day is Smart's not going anywhere. Rob's not going anywhere. Your starting lineup's probably back here, and most of the bench guys. You're going to add to the edges if you can. And this team's essentially running it back here, which I don't think anyone can be too upset about.
It's the reality. It's again, one thing Brad said, and I didn't play this bite, but just talking about it, and I know we'd snipped it, but we're not going to get to it. The fragility kind of this whole thing.
That was interesting, huh? What was your takeaway of that comment? Sum it up real quick for everyone.
I mean, I can play. Let me see if I can find it. I'll play it real quick. I'll let other people kind of make the decision.
Yeah,
here.
This was interesting. Brad was. Yeah, we'll play the clip.
I do have my take on what I think it is. Hold on. Let me see if I can find it, and I'll play it up here real quick. Where is it? Where are you? I don't want to accidentally.
I forget exactly what he was asked, but he was basically talking about the downside to tinkering with the team or bringing in a piece that doesn't fit or replacing one piece with another piece here, like sort of messing with the identity of the team that they built last year. They want to maintain that. But the way he described it was interesting to me.
All right, let me see if I've got it right here. Let me load up Brad. All right, I'll play this bite here. Here's Brad Stevens talking about how kind of like year to year, maintaining your identity and everything is fragile, even though they have an identity now.
And I mean, if you would have told me going into the Golden State series that we shoot 41% from three, I would have thought we have a heck of a chance of winning, obviously, but came up short. As far as improving, it's the same old deal. Draft, develop, and deals. You just look for things that make the most sense within your group. I think that we have a little bit of a, we have to walk a fine line a little bit. I think teams are fragile. I think the way that teams work together and operate together are fragile. And I think your identity as a team, when you find one that's successful, which we did this year on the defensive end of the floor, and when we were at our best sharing the ball offensively, those things are fragile. And so just to add doesn't mean that you're not taking something away from the group. And to change significant pieces in the group doesn't mean that might not totally take your identity and shift it in a direction that's not as successful. And so it's quite a fine line. If you ask me right now what we need, I'd like to have a little bit more scoring, consistent scoring off the bench. I think that we have some short-term needs there, but I believe in a couple of the guys that didn't get a chance to play as much, that they will continue to improve and be.
So I'll cut it there. Long story short, Bobby, I think it's yet another way of saying that we have an identity, and if we bring in a Dennis Schroeder type who has one specific skill set, and that's to play offense, or a shooter, that could disrupt the whole thing, and so it's yet another thing that kind of falls in line with this thing of like, we really need the people we bring in to fit our mold and our identity, which means, again, I just don't see them bringing in a guy who can only do one thing.
Yeah, I don't get the downside to doing it besides money, or it's such a bad deal, like in the Robinson case, that you're stuck there, and you're already kind of stuck with the White move if that doesn't work out, and certainly the Tice one here. So you'd be 3 moves in that keep you stuck roster wise at that point. But you got to try, right? Maybe it's not now, maybe it's down the line, and you want to keep that flexibility. But part of that, as we talked about, is still maintaining that salary slot. So you got to make some sort of move here. You got to bring in someone, and no one's going to be perfect. No one that's attainable is going to be this two-way dynamite player. So I'm actually closer to you than I thought, John, on that point you made yesterday. You got to be a little willing to veer at that spot, at the 9th or 10th spot on the roster, from your identity, to make this team more deep and versatile. And listen, I understand Brad's perspective from not wanting to trade Smart. I think if you flip Smart out with a worse defensive point guard, you could be net worse. So I understand his discussion if that's what he's talking about there. But otherwise, I think you can add a guy at the bottom end of the bench who isn't as dynamic defensively.
And that's the thing is, it's, points scored, points prevented. I mean, I get what he's saying. I think he's also saying the ripple effects of, like, if the entire team is this, unit that plays on a string, particularly as they did on the defensive end, and that's what made them so great and gave them their identity. You bring in 1 or 2 people that just kind of don't jive with that. Does that make everybody around you worse and drag the whole thing down? And again, that's why I mentioned Dennis Schroeder. Just Schroeder didn't fit with whatever it was they were trying to do. And every time that they inserted him, they had to take on a different identity on the floor than who they wanted to be all the times. Kemba Walker would be an example of a person a year earlier, and why that messed with them so much. So
then you had to try to get rid of him, and that was a 1-year small contract, never mind a $75 million contract.
Yeah. So I get all of that. I get where they're coming from with it, but more of the same there. So again, I think it's very clear. There's 2 clear messages coming out of today. The core is going to stay largely the same, which means you don't love Marcus Smart as a point guard. Too bad. That's going to be your point guard most likely next year. You don't, you think, obviously you have the Jays who are going to remain. You're going to have Al. You're going to have White. You're going to have Rob. And then, as we've discussed, you're looking for a couple of guys who are going to come in after the big 6 there and play some meaningful minutes and provide some things that you need. But also, those guys have to fit the identity, which means you're not just going to go get a couple of specialists or shooters. You're going to get guys who you think can play within your system and guys who can defend. So again, just throwing out names like a PJ Tucker type and things like that. Obviously, those people fit in with the mold and the identity of the team, and that's really important to them to preserve. And they've been given the financial flexibility, presumably, to make some of these moves and try to get some of these guys. So now it's in Brad we trust sort of situation where Stevens has to identify these guys and figure out whether or not they're worth bringing on the roster and whether they're going to fit. But I mean, for an end of the season press conference where normally you don't get a lot, I do think they did tip their hand a little bit. Doesn't mean they're going to do exactly what they say they're going to do, but when you aren't really trying to fake people out, then there's not really a sense to obfuscate. And Brad didn't. It's not like he gave specifics, but I think they're pretty clear. Yeah, we're trying to get a couple better players with the means that we have at our disposal, which is a TPE and MLE, and that's pretty much it. And then we'll see what else we have on our own bench. I think that's pretty transparent and pretty honest and pretty clearly, what they're going to be trying to do this offseason.
Yeah, and they have to make those 2 moves, the mid-level and the TP edition, because those are effectively assets that just expire if you don't use them. So there's no point in not using them other than just saving money. And I don't think they'll aimlessly just try to save money here for the sake of saving money. I do think Wick will spend to just at least utilize those assets there. Now, how much they do is still the question we don't know at this point. The last one there on the young guys on the roster, I know I've been a big Pritchard fan, but he was fine this year. I think he did show who he is in the end. And Neesmith certainly isn't in a great place right now, although has made strides defensively that I pointed out today in my article. So maybe it's worth waiting for his shooting turnaround just because he's made progress on the other end. And I was surprised to hear Ime at the end of the year talk about Sam Hauser making defensive progress. So when Ime talked about guys who didn't play as much last year, perhaps factoring in, I think that's a little encouraging. I just wouldn't rely on those guys for your depth. I think if they appear, it's great. If they don't, you already have.
It's almost like it's like it happened with Rob. I don't think they were counting on Rob, and all of a sudden Rob started robbing, and they were like, "Oh, whoa, hey, what do we got here?" So yes, certainly you could enter the season with what you think your core 9 are, with Neesmith and Hauser on the outside of it. And if they play their way in there or play their way past some people who you had higher on the depth chart to begin the year, freaking gravy. Are you kidding? Who here wouldn't be thrilled if all of a sudden a switch flipped for Neesmith and, he had a Jaylen Brown sort of revelation, from year, 1 to year 2 or 2 to 3.
If it was a Jaylen Brown revelation, we'd really be talking about
not quite,
18.
but I mean, I point to Jaylen just because he looked lost and he looked raw after 1 year, and you expected that. He hadn't played a lot of basketball and he came in raw to begin with. And then in year 2, you're like, this guy's got a little bit more to him than we thought. And you're starting to see it. So Neesmith, if you want to lump years 1 and 2 into one messed up year for him, maybe you can say, okay, what if I'm not bullish on it, but I agree with your point 100%. You can't count on it, but you can be pleasantly surprised if it happens. And if it does,
like we've talked about, there's no need to get rid of anyone just for the sake of getting rid of them. I think you keep as much as you can here and you try to add to it. And if there's value that you can improve upon and you're surprised by that, maybe you do make a move to surprise some people here. But I just don't see the starting lineup changing on this team at all, nor do I think it should. I just don't think there's opportunities. We're going to keep talking about Beal. I think today splashed some more cold water on that, especially when Wick was asked about a super team and he deferred to continuity, and the Celtics certainly, Brad rather talked about that a lot today too, their identity, what they want to be, and depth and all those sort of things. So I don't think Beal's going anywhere anyway this summer, but it definitely kicks the can back on that potential. And we talked about that yesterday. If that's a possibility down the line and your offense is struggling to start this year and you really don't look like you're in a good spot with Smart at point guard, then maybe you do kind of pull that escape valve and look at making that move with some of the salary and picks that you've assembled here. If not, then you can roll forward with what you have right now. But so I think you can kind of have the best of both worlds there. You can run it back, and if it doesn't work, you have a lot of flexibility to continue to make moves into the season.
So that's where we're at. One thing we want to tell you guys about, just as a reminder, Celtics don't have a first round draft pick, but the draft is on Thursday. They pick number 53. Bobby's been, burning the candle both ends here, trying to, do all of his research and come up with some players. Check out CLNS Media for a little bit of draft preview stuff coming up heading into that draft on Thursday. And what we are going to do is we'll be on standby here on Thursday night should the Celtics do anything silly like trade for Gordon Hayward and acquire the Hornets first round pick and trade.
Or the Robinson thing. I saw the Heat are floating their first round pick out there. So maybe that happens and they get a first round pick through that.
Who knows? But if the Celtics find their way into a first round pick in some way, that we're going to jump on there right away. Obviously, if they make a move, any sort of trade, it is an active day. There are transactions being made there, so we'll see. If there is a move made, we will jump in immediately, analyze and discuss whatever happened. If the Celtics trade into the first round, we will be there to discuss that as well. And if not, we'll wait until they make their pick and we'll come on and we'll kind of talk about.
Well, they could pull a Pats and trade out of 53, and then we just don't go live at all.
No, but I mean, we'll come on. We'll put a bow on the night. We'll talk about other things that happen around the league. Go over some of the stuff there. And I know even though the Celtics don't have a pick, there is interest among you in just kind of what happens generally. And it is a big night, obviously, on the NBA calendar. So we do want to, do something. So count on us to be around and doing one of these shows on draft night. And again, just want to mention to everybody, go check it out. Go to calm.com/garden. It's the #1 wellness app, sleep and meditation aid. Calm.com/garden. Receive a 40% off your premium subscription. Just go check it out if you're interested in this at all. I think it really is worthwhile. So please check it out. Until Thursday night, we're going to take tomorrow off. If there's breaking news, we will always be here. I guarantee you that. So easy way to follow us is subscribe to our YouTube channels, turn on your notifications, hit that little bell. You can follow Bob Manning here on Twitter, Real Bob Manning, or John_Zanis.
Robert Manning. That's what they called me at the finals because of my press pass.
Yeah. I put Robert in there. I wanted to age you up a little bit.
Yeah.
But a big finals run for Bobby. So that was great stuff. Great work, of course. But you can follow us on Twitter, follow Celtics CLNS. You get notifications that way as well when we are going to do one of these programs, which again are very frequent. Obviously, there's also a ton of free content that can be had on our YouTube channels as well with all of our Celtics pods. We have a zillion of them, some of the biggest names in the market, podcasting, Cedric Maxwell, Jeff Goodman, Bob Ryan, Adam Kaufman with Celtics Beat, Brian Robb, and I know
I'm gonna be trying to stack
Sherrod Blakely, Gary Washburn, sorry, and Bobby's podcast Dome Theory as well, so you can check that out.
Mark Schindler, one of those draft experts, is joining me tomorrow, and try to have as many as I can lean up to the draft over the next couple of days. Again, I wasn't able to research the draft as deeply as I did last year with the Celtics getting knocked out in the first round. So always good to lean on some experts here. We of course have Jeff Goodman as well, who probably knows more about these people than anyone. So
yeah,
look out for that over the next couple of days.
Yeah, Jeff's probably been in like half of their living rooms in the last year, so he knows these guys pretty well. Anyway, again, check us all out.
I remember we have a podcast if people want to jump back into the archives.
We should put that back out there. Yeah.
Of Chet and Paolo when they were probably like 16.
17. They were entering their senior seasons in high school, and Jeff had them on as the two consensus top 2 players entering their senior seasons before they even went to Duke and Gonzaga respectively. Really cool conversation with Banchero and Chet Holmgren. So we should unearth that, and I think it's worth re-releasing that for sure. That was a really good podcast. But again, we'll see you guys on Thursday night for draft coverage. Until then, Bob.